everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks so much for joining us for our two-day event, our big ideas. We're going to present 4 ideas over 2 days. And today we're going to punt because we're just going to share one idea, and I'm going to share my idea. So thanks everybody for being here. If you are here for CEUs, they are free. So thanks everybody for clarifying that for me. And you can earn as many as 2 CEUs, 1 CEU for each day, and you'll receive information about how to get your CEUs after tomorrow's event. If you have any questions, just feel free to post in the chat room. I'd be happy to help you. So let's get started with today's idea. And it's about a compassionate return to work. And as we go through this, I first would love for you guys to share in the chat room when you've returned to work after either a family member's chronic illness or unexpected illness or critical medical episode and or after a family member's death. So go ahead and share in the chat room what your experiences were when you returned to work after a family member's death and or a family member had a medical emergency. I'd love for you to share what that experience was like when you returned to work. Okay, so here's my big idea, and that is a compassionate return to work program. So just a little background about me. I began helping family caregivers, those who care for a family member, in 1990. And then I started a small business to help them in 1995. I managed a 24/7 online community for just about 24 years, and I sold it last year. And now I offer training and leadership development opportunities for family caregivers and former family caregivers. I started helping my parents in 2004 after my father's bladder cancer diagnosis, and have been managing and helping them for the past 17 years. And my mom was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's. They've had medical crises over the years. It's been up and down, up and down. And then my brother unexpectedly and suddenly passed away in August of this year. So just about 3 months ago. So after my brother's death and still managing the care of my parents, I really thought about what is it like to return to work? And for me, I was returning to my small business. And it made me think about how much flexibility I was able to give myself. And I wondered, well, what's it like when there isn't flexibility? What's it like when you have to just show up and be there when you're grieving and or still caregiving? And for me, because my brother's death was unexpected, we were really supporting my sister-in-law. Not that we wouldn't, but we were very involved in planning the funeral, all the services, and still helping my parents. And the day of his funeral was probably the worst day of my life just because of all that I was managing. So my parents are 90 and 87, so trying to manage their grief and be available for them, plus make sure they could be where they needed to be when they needed to be there, and then stand up at the altar and give a eulogy, and then arrange all the pieces again so that we could get to the cemetery and then to the luncheon afterwards. And it was exhausting. And so the week after the funeral, I worked a few hours every day, and then I was exhausted. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for sharing what your experiences are in the chat room. Yeah, Beverly, 3 days of bereavement leave. Yeah, I mean, that's nothing. That is nothing. And Dominique is sharing about her husband and his cancer diagnosis. Yeah, I will tell you too, I think we often just feel like we have to get back to work. And I think, Dominique, for your situation, you're dealing with, for instance, a diagnosis. So there's diagnosis day, but there's no time off to adjust after diagnosis day. You're back to work while you're still trying to absorb this information and then make plans, right? So you're scheduling doctor's appointments, you're making plans for chemo treatment, you're making plans for who will do what, when, how. And that is a significant loss. Diagnosis day is a significant loss. So that's a significant medical event right there. Then we also have to figure out, how do I tell people at work when I go back to work what it's like and what just happened and what we're dealing with? That's a lot too, to find the words. And then sometimes you don't want to talk about it, but yet you can show on your face that things are not right. And people might just ask. Okay, yeah, so Phil is sharing, yes, feeling low and exhausted afterwards. Absolutely. I co-facilitate a grief support group with Kathy, who's here today and who's going to be presenting tomorrow. We often talk about how exhausting it is to grieve. And we really attach the grief to the death. So we understand that exhaustion. And really there is this loss that happens during caregiving, which is part of our grieving process, which is exhausting for us as well. Okay, so sometimes I like to do statistics, but I thought it would be helpful just to put this problem into perspective. So in the workplace, 45% of employees care for a family member. Bank of America does an annual workplace survey, and that's based on their survey stats. So 45% of employees care for a family member. We know in a caregiving experience, we're often battling death. So think about almost half of the workplace is in a situation where they are really managing a difficult medical situation. And then if we just look at the numbers of individuals who died from COVID, just in the past 18 months, we're looking at 740,000 who've died from COVID. And then there are stats that say each death impacts, on average, 9 people. Wow. So I think about my situation, which is grieving and caregiving. Think about how many other individuals in the workplace are in a similar situation. While they're still caring for a family member, they're grieving the loss of a different family member. Okay, so we often talk about the caregiving problem in the workplace, but it's a caregiving and a grieving problem in the workplace. And I'd love for you guys to share in the chat room what tools and strategies you've been using when you feel overwhelmed by the emotions of caregiving and or grieving in the workplace. On a regular basis, I did an annual working family caregiver survey. And at the end of the survey, I would ask respondents if they had any suggestions for future questions. And the suggested questions I got were always great. And so I would add them into the next year's survey. And in 2018, one of the respondents wanted to know how others manage their stress in the workplace. And so I asked that question in the 2019 survey. And what was so interesting to me is that employees bring to work what they need to receive comfort during the day. So this is pre-COVID, so people are going into the office and they're bringing tools with them. They are bringing essential oils. They are bringing their phone with a playlist that they listen to. They are going into the meditation room that's available to them in the workplace, not to meditate, but to cry. And if there isn't something like a meditation room, they're going into the bathroom to cry. We bring these emotions to work. They are part of our experience. We'd love to be able to say, I can compartmentalize. I don't have to experience this. I can leave this behind while I'm at work. And the truth is, that's hard to do. Okay, so feel free to share how you managed these difficult emotions in the workplace. Yeah, so Phil is sharing, it was helpful to talk with friends, his support group, and reconnect with church to renew faith. Yeah. Yeah. And Dominique is sharing that it helps to get to work, that she gets to work remotely. Yeah. And she uses music to soothe, wax melts tell me more about wax melts. I'm making an assumption about them in my head, and I want to clarify what they are. So if you could tell me what wax melts are, that'd be awesome. Creating a place of serenity at home and work with decorating. Yes, I love that. We started doing an annual virtual meeting to help individuals plan their respite and play space, which is very similar to what you're talking about, Dominique, where you can create a corner of your bedroom, a space in your yard, a place in your community that you go to that helps you feel like, okay, I can take a deep breath, I can relax, I can receive. Okay, so Dominique is saying that the wax melts with the burner that plugs in. Okay, that sounds great. Okay, I think about a paraffin bath. That's what I was thinking of, where sometimes if you went to, like when I worked in a facility, a long-term care facility, we could go to OT and PT, the therapy room, and I could dip my hands into the paraffin bath, and it was awesome. It was awesome. Okay, so what's interesting to think about, our grief and our caregiving emotions that we bring to work are not in isolation. We're in good company. Others, 45% of your workplace is also managing those emotions. And Diana sharing compartmentalization doesn't work because the emotions have to come out some way. And if they aren't coming out, oftentimes there's an explosion, and that's how they're released, and that's hard. Okay, here's what's interesting though. So I shared those statistics which indicate that this is a huge situation going on in the workplace, and employers are not required to include time to plan or attend a funeral. So bereavement leave is not promised. It's not dictated. It's not regulated. There are 3 states that have passed something like a bereavement leave policy. In Illinois, it's 2 weeks of unpaid leave is required after the death of a child. In Maryland, paid leave can also be used for bereavement. And in Oregon, employers are required to provide 12 weeks of unpaid leave, and 2 of those 12 weeks can be used for bereavement. And I do believe, Dominique, you could use FMLA, family medical leave, for bereavement. And I'm curious if you, and this I'm asking all of you collectively, if you could create a policy that would support a bereavement leave benefit, how many days or weeks would you give off to someone who has just lost a family member? What do you believe is an appropriate amount of time off for a bereavement leave? I'd love for you to share in the chat room what you think that is. Okay, so minimum 1 month. I agree with that. Isaac is saying 5 days at a minimum. Absolutely, minimum 5 days, right? And my experience with my brother was it took us 5 days to plan his service. And then there was a week, and then we had his funeral on a Saturday. And that was that week between the finalized plans and the funeral felt like a week of limbo, just waiting. It was awful. Okay, so a lot of you guys are sharing 2 weeks. Yeah, and Beverly is suggesting 2 weeks with an option of an additional 2. I also think that, yeah, and it should be compassionate leave, absolutely. It also is up to maybe the individual to determine how much time. So having some flexibility around how much time is available. So an unexpected sudden death, I think, is feels that much more tragic than I think about my parents after their death. We have been thinking and talking about their death for years. It's not unexpected. We are expecting it. We are putting plans in place for it. So I think about what a bereavement leave would look like after their death would be very different than the leave I would have needed after my brother's death, especially because I was still in a caregiving experience. Okay. So what if we had a compassionate return to work? So I'm going to share my idea, and then we're going to have a conversation to talk out, what do you think? What needs to be tweaked, adjusted, changed? So here's my idea about a compassionate return to work. I believe it is good business to offer something like this because it protects productivity. So I think about that week, that limbo week. If I had gone to work, I would have never completed a project correctly. I would have had to redo my work. And I think that I would have brought so much trauma to my team in the workplace that it would have been unproductive for everyone. Just like we say, if we're so much more aware of being sick and staying home now because of COVID, I think if we're not well, it's important that we stay home and take care of ourselves. And in that limbo week, that definitely would have been a week where I needed to just stay home and take care of myself. I want to mention something else. When we talk about how much time and having that flexibility, I have a friend whose mom just died last month. Her mom died on a Wednesday. They did planning and organizing, so the funeral took place a week later, the next Wednesday, and she returned to work on Thursday. And she said, it was good for me. It worked. I was able to do it. So I think the flexibility has to be flexibility without judgment, right? We can't say Nancy was able to return the day after her mom's funeral. I don't know why Denise needs more time, because we don't know the circumstances. We don't know the whole picture. So flexibility without judgment, really trusting the employee to know how much time they need. Okay. It also can improve retention. I read an article, and actually I linked to the article at the end of my idea, where an employee, oh gosh, her fiance died unexpectedly. And she was trying to work. She had gone back to work and she was trying, but she wasn't able to meet her quota. So she lost her job. Well, now she's out talking about working for this company where she got fired after her fiance died. Well, I'll tell you what, that's not going to help with retention or recruiting, right? So we have to take care of our employees. They are our biggest and best resource. And when we look to how do we recruit and retain the best talent, it's around taking care of that talent. Beverly is sharing in the chat room that the flexibility provides options because some people look to work for therapy. Yes, absolutely. You can feel better being busy and productive. And some people just feel like, oh, I just need to be on my own by myself. I can't think clearly right now. Okay. So as I was mentioning earlier, it's really thinking about a compassion return to work after a death or a health crisis. And I also think it's support for the employee before they return to the office. And the office could be in person or virtual. And then the support continues after the return. So I was reading about programs that help moms return to work after the birth of their child. And there was one program where the support started a week before the mom returned to the workplace. And I thought, wouldn't that be helpful if a compassionate, kind, great listener from the office who's part of a department that manages this benefit, the caregiving department, calls and says, I know you're coming back on Monday. Tell me how you're doing. And then just listens. And then perhaps says, here's what you can expect when you come back on Monday. Here's what we're doing for you. Here's how you can reach out for help if the day feels too much. Here's who you can contact. And it would be, for instance, that great, compassionate, wonderful person who just called. Here's my phone number. Here's my email. Reach out. Okay. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice? I think it helps with the anxiety about returning to work. I had a friend whose father died when she was 23 or 24, and she really wanted to power through. So she was young when she was dealing with the grief. She really wanted to power through, and she went back to work the week after the funeral, and she couldn't do it. She couldn't manage it. It was too hard. People kept coming up and talking to her, which was so nice. They were so supportive, but it was so hard for her. So when you have those moments when it's too hard, wouldn't it be great if there was a resource in the workplace that said, you know what, we get that it's too hard. Come sit with me for a few minutes. Okay, so it's staff who've received training to provide support to individuals during difficult times like caregiving and grieving. And I really believe it's support around the situation. So for instance, could be offering a listening ear because the family situation is becoming very dysfunctional. It could be just listening to stories of the family member who just died. It could be listening to how the grief feels right now. So that support around the situation from someone who gets it is so helpful. I have a coaching client whose mother is dying right now, and he had requested a little bit of an emergency coaching session last night. So we talked for about an hour, and the conversation started with a question from him, which was, people ask me how they can help, and I don't know what I need. And so we talked, and it was, a tangent here and there. We continued to talk, and at the end of the time together, it was clear what he needed was someone to listen to his memories of his mom. Once we figured that out, it felt like he was empowered to say, I need to talk about my mom. And the other thing that became clear for him was he was thinking about how the family was going to gather to have rituals around her death. And it occurred to him that he wanted his own separate ritual with his friends. So he decided to invite friends over for dinner at some point in the next 10 days or so that they would have their own private service for his mother. And that was very comforting for him too. We can figure out what we need when we have someone who takes the time to listen to us figure out, oh my gosh, what do I need? Wouldn't it be great if someone called and asked, how are you doing? Tell me about what's happening. In addition, it would be so helpful to talk out the situation with someone who can help you find the words. So when you go back to the office and everybody says, I'm so sorry, how are you doing? You figured out what words you can use, and you can use different words depending on who it is you're connecting with. So words with clients, words with coworkers, words with managers, and you feel better that you have the right words for the right situation. In addition, wouldn't it be great if someone said, there's going to be times when the grief is going to hit you and it's going to feel very vulnerable. How would you like to manage that? And that was the other thing I talked out with my client. What do you do when you start crying? Okay, so there's conversations prior to the return to work, and then there's support after the return to work. And I think about it as something that happens around lunchtime. Again, it's virtual or in person, very easy to do it virtually. And if it's a national office, for instance, with locations throughout the United States, then it's just virtual meetings scheduled at lunchtime based on wherever someone is located. So East Coast would be, actually, you could just do it at noon, and then it always takes place at noon, but over across different time zones. So noon Eastern time, noon Central time, noon Pacific time. And then you gather with others in grieving situations to talk out how you're doing, to really exchange ideas about what's supportive and what's helpful, what words are good to use, how to know when it's too much, how to step away quietly without drama when it's too much, and then how to communicate with coworkers when it feels too much. And I thought about it in terms of what's the right amount of time. I thought, well, 2 weeks. What if it is a support group meeting available every day for 2 weeks, Monday through Friday? And then the employee can decide how often he or she wants to attend. And then if she wants to continue attending every month, she's welcome back. Okay, so it's a simple solution, right? We're not talking about, oh, we've got to create technology, we've got to create new processes. It's a simple solution. And if you've been a part of any of our other events, I talk about the caregiving department. And I really believe every organization needs a caregiving department. And that caregiving department includes staff who've received specific training to support coworkers and colleagues in caregiving and grieving situations. So the staff from the caregiving department could provide this compassionate return to work program. If an organization says, oh, no way, we're not going to do that, it could be that you ask an employee assistance program, which is part of a benefits package, to create something like this. Okay, so here's my call to action to you. So be the compassionate coworker. So if it's not logical or reasonable or doable yet for this to be something that you add in your organization, think about you as yourself being something like your own individual compassionate return to work. So you're the compassionate coworker. You could invite a coworker who's had a loss to join you for lunch, in person or virtual. And if you're thinking, I don't know how to listen, you could enroll in our masterclass, which is the art of listening, which helps you just be with someone as they talk out what's happening in their life and in their day. You also can be the compassionate coworker for yourself, really looking to find that resource that can help you figure out what you need, when you need it, and in what form you need it. Okay, so I did include some resources for you, and I'm actually going to add the link in the chat room. Let's see if I can do it. Sometimes it's hard to do this in Zoom. Let's see if it'll work. There we go. Okay, so there's one, and then here's the second one. The Great American Workplace isn't prepared for this much grief is actually an article that appeared in the Atlantic on Tuesday, which I thought was great timing for this presentation. So it was really helpful to read it. So here we go. So those are the resources for you. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up and ask for your feedback. What do you think about this idea, this big idea, a compassionate return to work? And you're welcome to unmute yourselves and just tell me what you think. Tell me if you see challenges. Tell me if you see wins. Tell me how you think could apply in your workplace and to your individual situation.
Hey, Denise, Kathy Rhodes from Champaign. How are you?
Hi, Kathy. I saw you RSVP and I thought, yes, I see Kathy today. How are you?
I'm great. Couple thoughts. I think maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I think a lot of maybe the smaller companies would really fall into really the message of this, but then such as myself, but then I'm thinking to offer a person off for a month, when I have such a small company
Yes.
is really difficult. But I really like, and I'm wondering if you have some kind of handout on about some of those great suggestions you said, just to be that compassionate person. So you're back to work in 2 weeks, but it might still be hard. So, hey, this is what I can help you with. I just really like, I might not be able to give you off a month, but I can give you that support of, hey, if you got to go outside right now and cry, or if you do have to go home. So if you have those ideas are really good. If you had something like that I could just remember to say to that person, I would find really helpful.
Absolutely. I would love to put together that for you. I might not get it done till Monday.
I was wanting it by 3:00 today.
I know. But I know that you're going to be really compassionate with me about not getting it to you until Monday. So
no, I don't need it that quickly, but I just thought if we could have some kind of handout, or these are the things to maybe bring up, to suggest, to remind yourself to do. I would love to have that, and even put that kind of in my policy manual, because it really is. I think a lot of it's up to the individual, how long they need, but they might also not realize they need longer. So what can I say to give them that compassion, but also not to give them off a month because I can't afford to have somebody off a month because who's going to replace them for that long? Those kind of things. That was just my only thought.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Kathy, from the perspective of a small business owner.
Mhm.
We really have to think about what's the continuity of the business.
Right.
We want to take care of the employees, and that includes remaining in business.
Right.
Yes, right. You want to keep them employed. So really thinking logically about what's possible. And employees will understand that, I think, when you say, I appreciate you so much coming back to work. And I understand that this might be difficult.
Yeah.
Here are some
So if
resources.
we have phrases
Love
like
that.
that you can help us, to think about and use when we're working with that individual, I find that to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, and Diane has asked for the same thing in the chat room,
Okay,
words to
great.
say, yeah, absolutely. What a great idea. I would love to. So we can all kind of do an informal compassionate return to work, just with talking about words and resources.
Right.
And I'm
Thank
wondering,
you.
yeah, Kathy, I wonder,
Yes.
how often have you run into this situation where there has been an employee who's had a death in the family?
Well, we've had a lot of aunts and grandmas die. I'm not always sure that's true, but I
Oh,
think,
I see. Okay, yeah,
what
my grandma died. I can't come in tomorrow. Okay, yeah.
well, really,
Okay.
your grandma died 2 months ago too. I mean, how many
Okay.
grandmas do you have? But so we have had that, but I mean, we've had on occasion, people's, closer family members or never a child or anything like that, because that would be very difficult to know what to do with that. So I would say it doesn't happen too terribly often, but it certainly is something that has happened, and I want to be prepared for when it might happen more often, depending on things.
You know what else, Kathy? So for our other attendees, Kathy has an adult day center in central Illinois. You actually have death as part of your business because
Oh, every day. Yeah.
clients are dying. And I'm
Right.
wondering, what's the support for your staff when a client dies?
Well, a lot of it has to do with whether they want to go to this, I would give them time off if they wanted to go to the visitation or the funeral. But I think it is kind of, and I try to go to as many as I can, but you do kind of put that behind emotionally and move on. But that could be something else that to address more often too. How close were you with this individual? Most people in healthcare, they kind of put that wall up for people that have died that they're taking care of, but it's got to be effective. It has to be affecting them somehow. So I think that's that could be a whole nother conversation on how to deal with that, the death of your clients. But there's certainly an emotion involved with that. And I don't know how well I've done that either. So I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, and I would love if anybody who's joining us has created any kind of even informal support in their workplace to support employees when patients and clients die. I would love if anybody has anything like that. And again, it could be very informal. I think it would be wonderful to hear about it. Because I've been thinking a lot about our direct care workforce shortage. And I think about the pain points for instance, a home health aide or a certified nursing assistant, and they are experiencing death regularly. And even if you feel like I have a pragmatic view of life, which means that I accept death, you still are surrounded by loss. And I'm not sure that we have figured out how to support individuals who have death as a part of their workplace so that that cumulative effect isn't a traumatic impact. So if you've been in a situation where over a period of 2 decades or 3 decades, you've been working around death, we want to make sure that you're in a good place emotionally. And I'm very interested in how do we make sure that we have some support in place around that. So that's interesting, Kathy, to talk that out with you. So thank you for that.
Well, also, you might be okay with someone that you've known really well dying, and then someone that you don't know died, and all of a sudden your grief comes out and you're like, why am I reacting so much to this person I didn't know as well when I didn't react so much? So it's, what is the word? Accumulation
Yes,
of death as a professional.
yes. So we're doing a conference November 12th, so a week from Friday. And one of our presentations is around caregiving trauma, and it's family caregiving trauma. So as a family member, the trauma you experience because you've witnessed a family member's medical crisis and how it adds up. And they have a term for it. It's building. It's like it builds until you just aren't able to cope anymore because you just don't have the capacity to continue to cope because the trauma keeps building. And I think about it around death too. It can feel like I'm okay. And then the trauma keeps adding up until you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not okay. And I have no idea why this particular incident set me off. Why was I so upset about this death, but not that death? And I think that's exactly what happens, Kathy, this idea that we just keep experiencing it and saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, right? That's what we say, I'm fine, I'm fine. Okay, so I think Kathy's point around if it's a small business, we have to be aware of how long the leave is because we want the small business to stay in business. So that's something for us to keep in mind. I'm curious if anybody else sees something that they think, oh gosh, here's a red flag or here's a big problem in this idea. Okay, I'm going to take your silence as no big red flags. And I'm curious if you think, generally speaking, this would be a helpful kind of program to implement in your workplace. And again, feel free to unmute yourselves or share in the chat room. Okay, so interesting comment in the chat room, which is actually what Kathy was alluding to, this idea that some staff were calling off because they said someone died, but you wonder if someone died. And so this idea of require proof in order to prevent abuse of the program. So there could be some way that the employee it could be that the employee applies to receive this support, and in that application process, which is very simple, there's maybe a link to the obituary or something that indicates that this really happened. And actually, that would be just helpful to know for the staff who's following up, to be able to read the obituary of the person who died, because then you can have a much more personal conversation. Okay, Beverly, you had to bring in an obituary. Okay, so very similar. So the application process could be that. And I think about a very simple application process where you complete a form, but you share a little bit of information so that when that staff follows up with you, they have information that's helpful to have a good conversation. Yeah, or a death certificate as well. But so here's what's interesting about a death certificate. We had a terrible time around this with my brother's death. He died at home. So he had the medical examiner picked up his body, and they wouldn't release his body until there were arrangements made. But my sister-in-law didn't have access to money to actually make the arrangements. So we were getting her access to money. We were figuring out which funeral home, and then the medical examiner released the body. And the only entity that could release the death certificate was the funeral home. It's the same with a cremation society. You can get a death certificate from either of those, but no one else. So we didn't have a death certificate until maybe 10 days after his death. We had the obituary up before we had the death certificate. Okay. Yeah, so I think about this simple application process where you ask for some information about the person who died, a link to the obituary, and then a little bit of information maybe around the family, and then some information about that employee and what their biggest concerns are or worries or stressors are right now. So then when that staff member follows up, you can have this great conversation because you have some insights already. I think we all are frustrated when we go into a healthcare system, for instance, and we have to go through the assessment. It's all these yes, no questions. And you think, oh my gosh, I can't answer another yes, no question. And it would be so comforting for someone to call and say, Denise, I'm reaching out because of our Compassionate Return to Work program at work. I just read your mom's obituary. She sounds like a fighter. How are you doing? And then you are able to have this really nice conversation because someone has already done research around your situation, has taken the time to invest time to know you better. Oh gosh, right there, you think, oh, I don't have to tell the story again. I don't have to go through the details again. I can just get into, this is what I need. This is what I'm worried about. Okay, so I'm curious, what would it mean to you if your organization had a program like this? As an employee, what would it mean to you? Kathy, can I put you on the spot for a minute? Yeah, yep, Kathy Murray.
Of course,
Okay.
Denise.
Okay, so I think about Kathy, who actually runs a benefits department for her workplace. So what do you think about this?
Sorry, I couldn't get on.
Oh, no. Oh, you know what, Kathy? I meant Kathy Murray. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Sorry,
fine.
that's sorry. I forgot we had a couple Kathys. Forgive me.
Sorry.
So Kathy Murray manages the benefits of her organization. So I'm wondering, Kathy, what do you think about this as an addition to a benefits plan? How easy is it? How difficult?
Well, the thing I was actually thinking is that I really want to have compassionate listening training for everybody in the organization so that everybody can take a turn, being partnered with someone and being their listener. Because we have a pretty small organization, but I think it's, I don't know, I just think that would be a nice community to come back to, it, a nice community to work in where people sort of learn how to listen and learn compassion skills.
Okay, so that's interesting. So in essence, it becomes a volunteer program.
Right.
In the workplace.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Especially when someone was mentioning earlier about returning to work after you have a child. Well, we have 2 people who are pregnant right now. And I know my assistant had a child and actually, really had a hard time, coming back to work, and various people have. So for any of those life events, it seems like you could have a compassionate companion or something who could be your person to help you, somebody to listen, somebody to just, be your person.
Okay, I hadn't thought about that, and that is brilliant. And we know this because of our caregiving situation. So we think about, once your caregiving experience is over, you want to make it better for the person behind you, which is why I've developed these training programs. And I think, so think about, this idea was inspired because I had a really hard time after my brother died. And I was thinking, how do I help other people? And I think, in a year or 2 years, I could be, if I were working for someone, I could be that compassionate listener so that I'm a volunteer for that Compassionate Return to Work program. So I'm curious, for those of you who are joining us, how likely would you be to volunteer for a program like this? Knowing that I think you also need some time for your own grief before you could actually be a volunteer, but I just am curious, who would volunteer? Yeah, okay, so we're getting a volunteer in the chat room already. Yeah, I think, okay, yeah. So how about that? We already have the program in place. We just need a little bit of structure. Thank you, Kathy. And So you have a one-on-one opportunity, and you also could do a grief support group in the workplace. And that grief support group could take place every Wednesday or whatever. And that's how you provide that ongoing support, is through your grief support group. That's really compelling. It's interesting, we think about mentor programs in the workplace, but we don't actually think about the mentor around emotions. So we think about mentor around career growth, and yet we are all bringing our tough emotions to work. So what if there was this mentor, this compassionate listener that helped us feel okay with however we're feeling while we're at work? And I love this volunteer part too, because it works so well virtually. That's easy.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is that you'll have, hopefully, like here we have people with different experiences. Like we have people who've lost a grandparent or lost a spouse or lost a coworker. So, they can really connect with the person who's experiencing something similar.
Absolutely. I know that so Kathy is the co-facilitator of the grief support group. And in our grief support group, maybe it was a month after my brother's death, we had someone joined who had lost a brother. And I was like, glue. I don't know how else to explain how I was. It was like a magnet. It was so comforting to someone who had lost a brother. Now, we were very different ages, and our brothers were very different ages. And yet it just was very comforting to talk to someone who had lost a brother. And the idea that you could have a volunteer who's had a similar loss. And I think about parents who've lost a child, who've had a death of a child, going back to work. And to be able to have that informal support from a colleague who has experienced a similar loss, being able to support you. And I'm very interested in how do we create these programs within a workplace, because there are other dynamics that need our support, that require a different kind of support. So for instance, every business has a different busy season, a different policy, different procedures, different cultures. And if you connect with someone who understands, oh my gosh, this death happened just before our busy season, oh no, who understands what that impact is like, it makes it easier. If you connect to, for instance, a counselor who is through your EAP, which is helpful, but doesn't understand the culture of your work, you feel like you have to explain it. You have to educate the counselor about why it's particularly difficult now because it's a busy season and there's a new software and there's a change in management. When if you just connect with someone who's in that culture and gets it and says, oh my gosh, with all the changes already happening in the workplace, and now you've got this on top of it, it's got to be overwhelming. Okay, so I guess maybe what we'll do in the last minute is do a very informal vote on this big idea. So if you wouldn't mind doing either can you do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or is it all just thumbs up? Okay, so if you like the idea, let's do a thumbs up. And if you don't like the idea, let's do that face that looks surprised or shocked. Okay, so far we've got thumbs up. And I love the idea that this could be a volunteer program, because we know if it's volunteer and there's no request for a budget, it makes it that much easier to implement when there is no budget. Okay, all right. Okay, so that was our big idea for today. Tomorrow we're going to have 3 big ideas. And then I'll share information about CEUs so you can earn your CEUs. And thank you for clarifying. There's no charge for the CEUs. Thank you guys for being here. And I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Beverly, do you want to stick around just for a minute?